September 19, 1944. Dawn over Lorraine, France. The air is heavy with fog and cordite. Dew glistens on the wrecks of shattered farm walls. Somewhere beyond the mist, engines growl. Deep, steady mechanical heartbeats of German Panther tanks moving through the haze. Their steel tracks crush the wet earth, sending vibrations through the ground. American scouts crouch low behind a hedgerow. They hear the Panthers before they see them. Then to flash. A sharp roar tears through the morning calm. Out of the fog, a blur of motion. Light, fast, almost weightless. The M18 Hellcat bursts forward from a hidden position, fires once and vanishes back behind the rise. Seconds later, another flash and a German tank erupts in flame. The Panther gunners swing their turrets, but there's nothing to lock onto. The enemy isn't where it should be. In that moment, the battlefield belongs not to the thickest armor, but to the fastest hunter. For the first time in years, German tank crews feel a new kind of fear, not from the sky above, but from a machine faster than their eyes could follow. This was the day the hunters became the hunted. By early 1944, the Second World War had entered its most punishing phase. Across Europe, the thunder of tank engines was the heartbeat of battle. From the steppes of Russia to the hedgerows of France, one truth dominated the ground war. The Germans ruled with steel. Their panzer divisions, spearheaded by the Panther and Tiger tanks, were the armored fist of Hitler's war machine. These machines were more than weapons, they were symbols of invincibility. With their thick sloped armor, high-velocity guns, and disciplined crews, they had shattered Soviet formations on the Eastern Front and mauled Allied forces in North Africa. Even seasoned soldiers spoke of them with a mix of respect and dread. When American and British troops landed in North Africa in 1942, they quickly discovered that their tanks, the M3 Lee, the M4 Sherman, were no match for the German heavyweights in head-on combat. Shermans burned easily under the deadly fire of the Panther's 75mm KWK-42, or the Tiger's famous 88mm gun. The imbalance was undeniable. But the United States had something the Germans did not. A doctrine born from speed, flexibility, and numbers. The Americans knew they could not build a tank heavier than every German design. Their factories were not meant to produce a handful of superweapons. They were meant to flood the battlefield with reliable machines that could move fast, strike first and be replaced faster than they were destroyed. Yet as the war intensified, another concept began to form inside the U.S. Army's tactical minds. A concept that separated tanks from tank destroyers. The idea was controversial from the start. American strategists believed that tanks should support infantry, not fight other tanks. For the task of destroying enemy armor, they envisioned a new breed of vehicle, lighter, faster, and equipped with powerful guns designed to ambush, not to duel. Thus the Tank Destroyer Command was born. It was not a product of desperation, but of doctrine, a calculated belief that mobility could defeat firepower. In 1941 and 1942, the U.S. Army established specialized tank destroyer battalions. Their mission was clear. If enemy tanks broke through the lines, these battalions would rush to the breach, outflank the invaders, and strike from the sides. They would not sit and defend, they would hunt. To achieve that, the Army needed a machine that could embody this philosophy, a vehicle that could move faster than fear itself. At first, the solution seemed simple. Modify the existing M10 Wolverine, which carried a powerful 3-inch gun but was sluggish and underpowered. However, combat experience in North Africa exposed its flaws. The M10 was too slow to execute the kind of rapid hit-and-run tactics envisioned by the doctrine. Its turret traversed slowly, its armor was thin, and its engine strained under its own weight. By 1943, the Army needed something entirely new, something lighter, more agile, and deadlier. The project that would answer that need was the T-70, developed by the Buick Motor Division of General Motors. It would later be renamed the M18 Hellcat. But the birth of the Hellcat was not a smooth process. Engineers were forced to choose between armor and speed. They could not have both. In a time when German tanks weighed over 40 tons, the American designers took a radical risk. They stripped away almost all armor, relying instead on velocity and stealth. It was a dangerous idea. Many in the Army doubted it would survive a single engagement. Yet the men behind the project believed that mobility itself was protection. If you could move faster than the enemy could aim, perhaps you wouldn't need armor at all. By mid-1943, prototypes of the new machine roared across test fields in Michigan. Soldiers who saw it in motion were stunned. Nothing that big had ever moved that fast. It could reach over 55 miles per hour, faster than any tracked vehicle of the war. It was an engineer's gamble and a soldier's dream. A tank destroyer that could appear, strike, and disappear before the enemy even realized what happened. And soon it would face its first trial by fire. Not in the calm of American test ranges, but in the broken landscapes of war-torn Europe. The M18 Hellcat was unlike anything the American Army had ever fielded. It was sleek, compact, and built around one simple idea: speed kills. At its core lay a revolutionary Continental R975C4 radial engine, borrowed from aircraft design. This 9-cylinder powerhouse gave the Hellcat an unmatched power-to-weight ratio. Its lightweight hull, only 18 tons compared to the 45-ton German Panther, allowed it to achieve breathtaking acceleration. On flat ground, the Hellcat could sprint up to 55 miles per hour, a speed no other armored vehicle in World War II could come close to. But that speed came at a price. Its armor was paper-thin, barely an inch thick on the sides and only enough in front to deflect light weapons or glancing shots. The open-topped turret, designed for situational awareness, left crews exposed to shrapnel, mortars, and the elements. Even a well-placed burst from a machine gun could wound the men inside. Still, for those who operated it, the trade-off was worth it. The M18 wasn't built to take hits. It was built to avoid them entirely. The design team at Buick, led by engineer Harley Earl, focused on a suspension system that allowed smooth, high-speed maneuvering over rough terrain. The torsion bar suspension, combined with its powerful engine, gave the Hellcat astonishing agility. Crews could change direction quickly, dart between cover and reposition before enemy gunners could traverse their turrets. By mid-1943, production lines were rolling at full pace. American factories were delivering hundreds of Hellcats each month, their polished aluminum hulls gleaming under factory lights. Every unit represented a philosophy, that flexibility and daring could overcome brute strength. Before the Hellcat could join the battlefields of Western Europe, it first saw action in Italy. The mountainous terrain was a harsh testing ground for any armored vehicle. Roads were narrow, slopes steep, and ambushes constant. But here the Hellcat's mobility proved its worth. Units like the 805th Tank Destroyer Battalion used it to maneuver through mountain passes and engage German armor from unexpected angles. Its speed allowed it to redeploy faster than any tank destroyer before it. Crews learned quickly that survival meant anticipation. They had to strike before being seen. Every engagement a dance between precision and panic. They would wait in ambush, hold their fire until the first German tank exposed its flank, then unleash the 76mm M1 gun and vanish before the counterfire arrived. The results impressed Allied commanders. Reports from Italy described the Hellcat as unlike any other weapon on the battlefield. Its ability to relocate after each shot made it seem as if multiple units were firing at once, creating confusion among German crews. By the summer of 1944, as the Allies prepared to invade France, the Hellcat was ready for its defining test. The 704th, 705th, and 773rd Tank Destroyer Battalions were among the first to receive the vehicle in large numbers. Each battalion trained extensively in the doctrine of rapid response. Seek, strike, and destroy. When these units landed in Normandy and moved inland through the Bocage countryside, they encountered the brutal reality of close combat. The hedgerows limited visibility, and heavy German armor, Panthers, Tigers, and Jagdpanzers, lay waiting beyond every field. The Hellcat's thin armor made every hit fatal, but its speed gave it one crucial edge: initiative. In several engagements, Hellcat crews would deliberately lure German tanks into open areas. Once the heavy vehicles committed to a direction, the lighter destroyers would encircle them, firing from flanking positions where the German armor was weakest. For the first time, Allied tankers had a machine that could exploit German rigidity, turning the enemy's strength into a weakness. The Germans, confident in their armor, were unprepared for an opponent that refused to fight by their rules. Yet this new form of warfare demanded immense courage. Hellcat crews operated with the knowledge that one mistake meant instant death. Unlike the thick-skinned Panthers, they had no second chances. Theirs was a game of timing and precision, where success was measured in seconds, not minutes. By late 1944, Word had spread across the front lines. German commanders began warning their units, beware of the American fast cats. Reports described vehicles moving faster than expected and striking before our guns could turn. What had begun as an experimental doctrine was now a battlefield reality. The Tank Destroyer Command had proven that speed, coordination, and boldness could challenge even the most feared armored formations in the world. But the greatest test still awaited. In the autumn of 1944, as the Allies advanced into France, the German army launched one of its final great counterattacks in the region of Lorraine. It was there, in the fog, fields, and chaos near the town of Arracourt, that the M18 Hellcat would face its ultimate trial against Germany's finest. And this time both sides would learn how fast fear could travel. The M18 Hellcat was not just another weapon, it was an idea made of steel, speed, and risk. To understand its impact, we must look at it from different lenses, each revealing a side of its genius and its danger. On paper, the Hellcat's design looked suicidal. Thin armor, open turret. A light gun compared to the massive cannons of the Panther or Tiger. Yet in the right hands, it became one of the most dangerous ambush predators of the war. U.S. doctrine emphasized mobility over armor. Hellcat crews were trained to fight like ghosts, never staying in one place long enough to be hit. In combat, their tactics resembled a deadly rhythm. Fire, relocate, repeat. When a German column approached, the Hellcats would lie in wait, engines idling, hidden behind hedgerows or low hills. The lead vehicle would let the first tanks pass, then open fire on the flank, the weakest point in German armor. The first shot had to count. A miss could mean death. After firing, crews immediately backed away or accelerated into new cover, using their speed to vanish before return fire arrived. German gunners, used to dueling slower opponents, were often left shooting at empty smoke. This fluid style of warfare confused the enemy. German tankers, trained for head-on engagements, found themselves outmaneuvered. Their heavy turrets turned too slowly, and their engines too heavy to pivot in time. What the Hellcat lacked in brute force, it compensated with motion and timing, a dance of precision against power. Commanders quickly realized that one platoon of Hellcats, if properly positioned, could disrupt entire German spearheads. They became the scalpel in an army of hammers, surgical, fast, and devastatingly efficient. The Hellcat's technology reflected an almost radical philosophy. Don't survive hits, avoid them. Its Continental radial engine produced over 400 horsepower, propelling the 18-ton frame faster than any other tracked vehicle in World War II. Engineers stripped away everything unnecessary, heavy armor, thick steel plates, even internal insulation, to shave off weight. Its open-topped turret was not a weakness by accident. It was deliberate. It gave crews a 360-degree view of the battlefield and faster reload times. Communication between the commander, gunner, and loader was instantaneous. No radio delay. No shouted orders muffled by armor. Inside, the 76mm M1A2 gun could penetrate most German medium tanks from the side, and even challenge heavier tanks under the right conditions. When firing specialized HVAP, high-velocity armor-piercing rounds, the Hellcat could punch through nearly 130 millimeters of armor, enough to cripple a Panther at close range. But the real secret weapon was not the gun. It was the suspension and drive system. Its torsion bar suspension and lightweight chassis allowed Hellcats to maneuver faster than most wheeled vehicles. Crews could drift, pivot, and accelerate with shocking smoothness, even on broken terrain. German reports after combat often misidentified the Hellcat as a light reconnaissance tank because of its speed. They simply couldn't believe a gun that strong belonged to something so fast. This confusion became its advantage. On the battlefield, the M18 blurred the line between hunter and prey. It wasn't supposed to go toe-to-toe with heavy tanks, yet it often did and won. The technological gamble paid off. Every element, from engine to gun to open turret, existed for one reason: to move faster than death itself. War is not just a contest of machines but of minds. For German tank crews, confidence had been built on a decade of battlefield dominance. They trusted their armor. They trusted their firepower. But when they met the Hellcat, something new entered their minds: doubt. They began to encounter an enemy that didn't fight by the rules. The Panthers would advance, expecting slow-moving Shermans. Instead, shells would strike from unexpected angles, then vanish into the mist. German crews would traverse their turrets toward the source, only to find nothing there. Seconds later, another shell would hit from a different direction. That sense of control, the certainty that they could dictate battle, began to erode. Hellcat crews, meanwhile, lived with their own kind of fear. They knew they were one mistake away from annihilation. A single hit, even from a 20mm autocannon, could tear through their armor. They often fought with their sleeves rolled up, exposed to the air, relying purely on instinct and trust in their drivers' reflexes. Survivors described the experience as fighting on adrenaline. One veteran of the 704th Battalion later recalled, "We didn't think about armor. We thought about angles and timing. If we stopped moving, we died." This mindset, equal parts courage and fatalism, made Hellcat crews some of the most daring soldiers in the American Armored Corps. They weren't shielded by their machines. They were sharpened by them. And while the Germans feared losing their tanks, the Hellcat crews feared losing seconds. The Hellcat's combination of speed, daring, and unpredictability was rewriting the rules of armored warfare. But there were still more sides to this story. The human cost, the leadership decisions that enabled it, and the enemy's growing desperation to stop it. Inside the Hellcat, there was no comfort, no safety, and only noise, heat, and risk. When its radial engine roared to life, the entire vehicle vibrated like a living thing. Crews wore goggles not for fashion, but for survival. Dust, smoke, and debris filled the open turret at every burst of speed. A 5-man crew, commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver, functioned as a single nervous system. Each man had seconds to react, and a single hesitation could cost all their lives. The thin armor offered no illusions. Every Hellcat crewman knew if you were hit, you burned. They lived on edge, often operating ahead of infantry, scouting enemy lines or supporting tank formations from a distance. Many crewmen described their machines as paper tanks, but they also loved them for what they were. The Hellcat was fast, responsive, and alive. When the driver shifted into high gear and the wind tore through the open turret, men said it felt like freedom, even in the middle of war. To them, speed wasn't just protection, it was identity. Hellcat crews prided themselves on agility, precision, and nerves of steel. They were part of a brotherhood that thrived on danger, trusting that quickness could substitute for armor. Letters home reflected that strange duality, pride and dread intertwined. One Hellcat commander wrote, "We move faster than any tank here. It feels good until you remember why, because if we stop, they kill us." Their courage wasn't loud or cinematic. It was quiet, mechanical, and measured in milliseconds. The time between seeing a German tank and deciding to fire. And though they rode in one of the fastest machines of the war, they lived every day knowing that death could still arrive faster. Behind the Hellcat story were the men who believed that doctrine mattered more than armor thickness. One of them was Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the driving force behind the U.S. Army's Tank Destroyer Command. McNair saw tank destroyers as the fire brigade of the battlefield, mobile forces that would rush to meet and annihilate enemy armor where it appeared. His idea was born not from theory, but from watching Germany's blitzkrieg tear across Europe in 1940. He understood that static defense was suicide against mechanized war. Mobility, he believed, was the new shield. Under McNair's guidance, tank destroyer units were trained to move fast, strike hard, and never wait for orders. Each battalion was self-contained, with reconnaissance, communication, and artillery support, capable of reacting instantly to threats. Yet McNair's doctrine was never universally accepted. Many traditionalists in the U.S. Army, including senior armored officers like General George S. Patton, distrusted the concept. Patton preferred heavily armored tanks that could fight head-on. To him, tank destroyers were too fragile for sustained combat. But McNair persisted. He believed wars were not won by armor thickness, but by flexibility and initiative. The Hellcat would become his vindication, the physical embodiment of everything he had argued for. By 1944, as tank destroyer battalions equipped with Hellcats moved across France, their success began to silence the critics. Reports showed that well-coordinated Hellcat units could outfight superior German armor through speed, communication, and ambush tactics. McNair would not live to see the full impact of his vision. He was killed in Normandy in July 1944, tragically struck by friendly fire during an air raid. But his doctrine lived on in every Hellcat that sped across Europe. Each vehicle was a tribute to his belief that intelligence and speed could outwit brute force. For German tankers, the battlefield had always been a realm of control. Their tanks were superior, their optics sharper, their armor thicker. They entered battle with the confidence of years of victories, from Poland to France, from Kiev to Kasserine. But by 1944, that confidence began to crack. Reports filtered back from the Western Front describing new American vehicles that appeared and disappeared too fast to track. German commanders initially dismissed these accounts as exaggeration. No tracked vehicle could move like that. But encounters with the Hellcat proved otherwise. Panther crews reported ambushes where shells struck from extreme angles, sometimes from multiple directions within seconds. The attackers moved so rapidly that counterfire hit empty terrain. The term Schnellkatze, fast cat, began appearing in field notes and debriefs. At first, the Germans assumed these were light recon vehicles armed with smaller guns, but Rex examined after battle revealed a full-sized 76mm weapon and organized American tactics that mirrored their own blitzkrieg principles, only faster. This realization unnerved many experienced crews. The battlefield advantage they had enjoyed for years, superior firepower and protection, was now being turned against them through movement and surprise. Even the elite Panzer Lehr Division and seasoned Panther battalions found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to stand still. Every time they tried to flank or close in, the Hellcats were gone, repositioning miles away, striking again from another side. German field reports after the Arracourt engagements noted frustration and disbelief. Enemy tanks struck from invisible positions. Their fire was accurate, their withdrawal immediate. We could not maintain visual contact. For a German army built on discipline and control, this unpredictability was poison. It broke rhythm. It bred hesitation. And on the battlefield, hesitation was fatal. The Hellcat had achieved something rare in war. It changed the psychology of its opponents. But soon that psychological edge would be tested in the most ferocious tank battle the U.S. Army would fight on the Western Front. In September 1944, near the small French town of Arracourt, the M18 Hellcat would face Germany's finest and prove that speed could destroy even giants. September 18, 1944, the Lorraine region of France. A sea of fog rolls across the lowlands, shrouding the valleys and villages. The fields are wet, the air cold. Through the mist, you can barely see 20 yards ahead. Somewhere inside that white silence, two armored forces are groping for each other. One, the battle-hardened German 5th Panzer Army. The other, the U.S. 4th Armored Division, supported by the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion equipped with M18 Hellcats. The Germans had launched a counter-offensive to reclaim ground lost during the Allied advance after the breakout from Normandy. For the first time since D-Day, they were on the attack in force. Panthers, Panzer IVs, and Jagdpanzer IVs pushing eastward under the command of General Hasso von Manteuffel. Their goal? Cut through the thin American lines near Arracourt and drive toward Nancy. But the fog that morning was both ally and enemy. Visibility was nearly zero. Engines growled like beasts somewhere in the haze, and neither side could see who moved first. Inside a Hellcat, the tension was unbearable. The open-topped turret let in the cold moisture. Condensation dripped from the edges of the gun breech. Crewmen strained to hear. The distant grind of metal, the occasional pop of small arms fire. Then through the fog a shape loomed. A German Panther. The Hellcat commander whispered the order. The gunner aligned the 76mm sight, a faint silhouette just 150 yards away. The shell fired, tearing through the mist, striking the Panther's side armor. Flames erupted from its engine deck, lighting the fog with orange glow. The crew inside barely had time to react before the American destroyer vanished behind a ridge. This became the rhythm of Arracourt. Small groups of Hellcats and Shermans moved like hunters in the mist, striking quickly and fading into cover. The Germans, advancing in tight formations, struggled to coordinate. Their radio communication faltered, their reconnaissance non-existent. They expected a defensive fight. Instead, they stumbled into a storm of fast-moving ambushes. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, under Lieutenant Colonel Charles B. Yarborough, became the linchpin of the defense. Its Hellcats darted from one flank to another, exploiting the fog and terrain. They didn't wait for the Germans to find them. They went hunting. The German Panthers, powerful but cumbersome, had been designed for open-field duels. In Lorraine's rolling hills and thick fog, their long-range optics were useless. Crews often fired blind, hitting nothing but empty ground. Meanwhile, the Americans, guided by radio and local villagers' knowledge of the terrain, executed rapid counterattacks that seemed impossible for such light vehicles. One American officer later described it simply, "The fog was our armor." On September 19th, as the battle intensified, German units attempted to break through near the village of Lise. A formation of 12 Panthers advanced across open ground, unaware that a platoon of Hellcats lay hidden behind the ridge. The Americans waited. The first Panther crested the hill. One shell, perfect hit. The tank erupted. The second and third followed. More shells streaked out, the gunners adjusting range by instinct. Within minutes, 5 Panthers burned. The survivors turned their guns, but the Hellcats had already relocated. This pattern repeated again and again. The Germans advanced in power. The Americans replied with motion. At one point, a Hellcat was hit by a near miss. The blast showered the crew with mud and shrapnel. The driver, half-blinded, still managed to reverse at full throttle into cover while the gunner reloaded. Moments later, the same vehicle re-emerged, fired again, and took down the Panther that had fired on it. The courage was relentless. Crews fought from instinct, teamwork, and pure nerve. By the end of the third day, the Germans were stunned. Reports indicated heavy losses. Dozens of tanks destroyed, many abandoned after being crippled by side and rear shots. American casualties were minimal in comparison. The Hellcats' hit-and-run tactics were working beyond expectation. And yet the fighting was far from over. Von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army regrouped, throwing in fresh reinforcements. They believed the Americans were stretched thin and disorganized. They did not yet understand that the chaos they perceived was deliberate, the product of speed, radio coordination, and the adaptability of units like the 704th. The fog lifted slightly on the morning of September 20th. The bee within moments. 4 Panthers are aflame. The Americans vanish again before counterfire can find them. Artillery begins to fall. German shells whistling down, tearing up the ground around the American positions. Fragments rattle against the open turrets of the Hellcats. The crews keep moving, driving hard between bursts, firing, relocating, and firing again. One crew, Under Sergeant Ralph Ayres, is nearly cornered by a Panther that breaks through a hedgerow. The two vehicles face each other at point-blank range. Less than 100 yards. Ayres yells, "Driver, reverse!" The Hellcat jerks backward, firing on the move. The shot glances off the Panther's glacis but strikes its exposed track. The German tank lurches, immobilized. A second shell follows, this time straight into the turret ring. The explosion lifts the Panther's hatch clear off. That engagement would later be cited as one of the most daring close-range duels of the entire battle. By afternoon, the Germans realize they're losing momentum. Their coordination, already strained by poor visibility and communications, begins to collapse. Units advance without reconnaissance, running straight into concealed American lines. A German after-action report would later lament, "The enemy appeared where he should not be. His vehicles moved faster than we believed possible." Meanwhile, American morale soars. Radio calls from tank destroyer crews are filled with calm confidence. Another Panther burning. 3 confirmed kills. Moving position. In total, the 704th and supporting units destroy more than 80 German tanks over several days, most of them far superior on paper. But it's not just the Hellcat's speed or gun that wins the day, and it's the coordination. Artillery, air support, and reconnaissance planes relay positions. Infantry units plug gaps. Sherman tanks counterattack when the Germans are disoriented. The battlefield becomes a web of movement. Adelfield revealed itself. Smoking craters, twisted metal, and dozens of burning wrecks scattered across the fields. But in the distance, more German armor was on the move. The Hellcats refueled, rearmed, and repositioned. Their commanders knew that the next wave would be larger, more coordinated. The question now was not whether the Hellcat could strike, it was whether it could endure. September 20th, 1944, dawn again over Arracourt. The fog that had once shielded the Americans begins to thin. Shafts of pale sunlight pierce the mist, revealing the full horror of the battlefield. Blackened wrecks, torn earth, the smell of burned oil and cordite. The silence lasts only seconds. Then distant engines rumble once more. This time, the Germans are coming in force. The 11th Panzer Division, supported by the Führer Big Light Brigade, launches a renewed assault. Dozens of Panthers and Panzer IVs crawl forward, their engines echoing through the valleys. They advance methodically, with infantry support and artillery softening the ground ahead. Inside the command post of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, radio chatter fills the air. Reports come in fast. Contact near Arracourt. Armor sighted at Jubilees. Infantry moving toward Leasy. Lieutenant Colonel Yarbrough knows what's coming. A full-scale push aimed at breaking the American line. He issues a calm but decisive order. Let them come in close. Then move fast. Don't stay still. Don't let them find you twice. The Hellcats fan out. Some take positions along low ridges. Others conceal behind haystacks and stone walls. They know they can't trade blows with Panthers head-on. Their armor is paper-thin. A single 75mm hit could tear through them like foil. Their survival depends entirely on speed, stealth, and timing. By mid-morning, the first Panthers appear. Their long guns elevate slightly, scanning the horizon. The Hellcats hold their fire. Discipline born from experience. At 800 yards, still too far. At 600, still waiting. At 400 yards, one commander whispers, steady. Then at the signal, the first shot cracks. The shell strikes a Panther's side plate, punching through and igniting the fuel line. The explosion rips through the still morning air. The battlefield erupts. The Hellcats burst from concealment, racing across the fields at full throttle, kicking up dirt as they change position. German tanks attempt to pivot, but their slower traverse can't keep pace. Every time a Panther turns its turret, its flank is already exposed to another Hellcat waiting in ambush. One platoon executes a daring maneuver, circling behind a German column using a sunken farm road, emerging less than 300 yards from the rear of the formation. Flexible, fast, and lethal. As the sun begins to set on September 20th, the fields of Lorraine glow with a strange orange haze. Flames from dozens of wrecks reflect off the low clouds. The ground trembles with the last distant explosions. The Germans withdraw. What was meant to be a decisive counterattack has turned into a disaster. They leave behind burning armor, broken radios, and shattered morale. At the American command post, Yarbrough studies the map. The German line has crumbled. The men are exhausted, filthy, half-deaf from gunfire, but alive. Against all odds, the lightest armored vehicle on the battlefield has outsmarted and outmaneuvered one of the most feared armored forces in the world. The Hellcat crews know what they've achieved, but they also know what it cost. Dozens of friends gone, tanks burned out, nerves frayed to the breaking point. Yet through that crucible, a legend was born. A machine that fought not through armor but through audacity. Arracourt would go down in history as one of the greatest tank battles ever fought by the U.S. Army. And the moment the M18 Hellcat earned its place among the most remarkable fighting vehicles of the war. The fields around Arracourt were quiet now, but the air still carried the acrid smell of burning fuel and scorched steel. Twisted Panther hulls lay scattered across plowed farmland, their turrets yawed at impossible angles. The earth bore scars of repeated shell fire, tire tracks, and churned mud from frantic maneuvers. For the German army, the defeat was a stark blow. The 5th Panzer Army had advanced with confidence, expecting to smash through lightly defended positions. Instead, they encountered a new reality. American units that did not fight by their rules. Their heavy tanks, meant to dominate through armor and firepower, were unable to track the rapid movements of the M18 Hellcats. Panther crews were bewildered by sudden attacks from unexpected angles, forced into reactive positions they were untrained for. Official reports from German officers reflected both frustration and disbelief. One noted, enemy vehicles moved faster than anticipated. Our tanks, formidable in open fields, were rendered ineffective by their mobility. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion and its supporting units had achieved something extraordinary. In 3 days of fighting, they destroyed an estimated 80 German tanks, many of them Panthers and Panzer IVs. American losses were comparatively light, a handful of Hellcats destroyed or damaged, and minimal personnel casualties. The battle demonstrated the effectiveness of the tank destroyer doctrine in practice. For the U.S. Army, it validated the concept that mobility, combined with disciplined fire and coordination, could defeat heavier armored forces. Tactical reports from the 4th Armored Division highlighted how speed, reconnaissance, and the proper use of terrain allowed lighter vehicles to dominate opponents who were superior in raw firepower. The psychological impact on German troops was perhaps even more significant than the material losses. Field notes describe growing caution among Panther crews, who began to fear encountering Hellcats in unknown terrain. Confidence, once a hallmark of Germany's armored forces, gave way to apprehension. The Schnelle Katze, the fast cat, became a whispered legend across the Western Front. American commanders studied the lessons carefully. Reports stress that the key to the Hellcat's success was not just its gun or its speed, but the combination of doctrine, crew training, and tactical innovation. Unit cohesion, radio coordination, and disciplined firing routines allowed small numbers of Hellcats to hold off or destroy much larger German forces. Beyond the battlefield, the victory at Arracourt shaped U.S. armored doctrine. The tank destroyer battalions gained respect from skeptical officers, proving that speed and mobility could challenge the assumption that armor thickness dictated battlefield supremacy. Yet, the battle also revealed the limitations of the Hellcat. Its light armor meant that crews remained exposed to artillery, mortars, and concentrated anti-tank fire. Many veterans later reflected that the success of the vehicle was as much about human skill and decision-making as it was about the machine itself. In the days following Arracourt, the Allies pressed forward into Lorraine, their confidence bolstered by the Hellcat's performance. The Germans, meanwhile, adjusted tactics, relying more on ambushes and combined arms to counter the new threat. But the momentum had shifted. The myth of German invincibility in armor had been shattered by an American creation that relied on speed, cunning, and audacity rather than brute strength. Arracourt would be remembered not just as a tactical victory, but as a moment when doctrine, innovation, and courage combined to redefine armored combat. It was the day the fastest vehicle on the battlefield forced the most feared armor to retreat, a testament to what bold design and disciplined crews could achieve against overwhelming odds. The echoes of Arracourt resonated far beyond the Lorraine countryside. Military analysts across both sides of the Atlantic studied the battle with intense scrutiny. The M18 Hellcat, once seen as a risky experiment, had proven that speed and agility could defeat heavier armor, a revelation that challenged conventional wisdom. For the U.S. Army, the engagement validated years of planning and doctrine. The tank destroyer command's emphasis on mobility, reconnaissance, and rapid engagement became a case study in modern warfare. Units trained in ambush tactics, coordinated fire, and quick relocation were no longer theoretical. They were lethal. Commanders took note. A small, well-led, and agile force could achieve disproportionate results. This principle influenced later operations across Europe, including the rapid advances through the Rhineland and into Germany in 1945. The Germans, meanwhile, faced a psychological reckoning. Panther and Tiger crews, accustomed to battlefield supremacy, now had to contend with vehicles that moved faster than their guns could traverse. Reports after Arracourt expressed growing frustration. German armor was formidable in open engagements, but the Americans had introduced a new variable, unpredictability combined with velocity. By the winter of 1944, German officers were issuing instructions specifically to counter fast-moving American tank destroyers, emphasizing reconnaissance, combined arms coordination, and tighter formations to reduce vulnerability. The fear of the fast cat lingered long after the smoke cleared. Yet the battle also revealed the inherent limitations of the M18. Its thin armor made it highly vulnerable to artillery, mines, and concentrated anti-tank fire. The open turret, while advantageous for visibility and rapid firing, exposed crews to shrapnel and the elements. Success depended heavily on training, discipline, and doctrine. Without careful execution, the Hellcat could quickly become a death trap. Despite these risks, the M18 left a lasting legacy. Its design philosophy, sacrificing armor for speed, would influence post-war thinking about mobile anti-tank platforms. The concept of shoot and scoot became foundational in mechanized doctrine, not just for the U.S. Army but for NATO forces during the early Cold War. Mobility, rather than sheer firepower, was recognized as a decisive factor in modern armored engagements. After World War II, the Hellcat itself was gradually retired, replaced by heavier, more versatile armored vehicles. But the lessons it taught endured. Arracourt became a reference point in military schools. How disciplined crews, innovative tactics, and high-speed vehicles could neutralize an ostensibly superior opponent. The M18 demonstrated that war was not merely about brute force, but about adaptability, intelligence, and the willingness to take calculated risks. Moreover, Arracourt highlighted the human dimension of warfare. The courage and ingenuity of Hellcat crews under extreme danger, illustrated that technology alone does not win battles. Human skill, coordination, and trust in doctrine are equally crucial. The speed and audacity of the Hellcats amplified the bravery of their crews, turning vulnerability into a weapon. By the end of 1944, the story of the M18 had spread across the Western Front. American tank destroyers were no longer just support vehicles. They were feared hunters. The German Army, once the master of armored warfare, now approached encounters with caution and respect. The victory at Arracourt was not only tactical but symbolic. It marked a turning point in the perception of armored combat, showing that innovation and speed could overcome even the most formidable steel. The battlefield lessons of Lorraine would ripple into the decades that followed, influencing tank design, mechanized doctrine, and armored tactics across the world. The M18 Hellcat's success became a benchmark for understanding how agility, precision, and human courage could redefine the art of war. The sun sets over the Lorraine fields long after the smoke has cleared. Twisted metal cools in silence, and the echoes of engines and gunfire fade into memory. The M18 Hellcat, a fragile machine by any measure, had proven that speed, discipline, and daring could overcome the heaviest armor. Arracourt was more than a battle. It was a lesson in adaptability. German tank crews, confident in their Panther and Tiger tanks, discovered that even the most formidable weapons are vulnerable to ideas, speed, innovation, and tactical cunning. For the Americans, the battle validated a doctrine that trusted human skill and mobility over brute force. The Hellcat's legacy lies not only in its firepower or speed, but in the way it shaped modern thinking about warfare. It taught commanders that machines are extensions of human decision-making, and that innovation often comes from challenging conventional assumptions. One could outgun the enemy, but to outthink and outmaneuver them required courage, coordination, and trust in both men and machines. Yet the story of the Hellcat is also the story of the men who wrote it. Inside that thin aluminum hull exposed to shrapnel and bullets, soldiers acted with calm precision under impossible pressure. Their bravery transformed vulnerability into advantage, their nerves into strategy, their speed into survival. Arracourt reminds us that victory is rarely about sheer strength alone. It is about timing, foresight, and the willingness to embrace calculated risk. It is about understanding that in war, as in life, agility and courage can overturn what seems invincible. The M18 Hellcat and its crews became symbols of a new kind of warfare, a war where speed, audacity, and human ingenuity could challenge steel, firepower, and fear. In the end, the fastest machine on the battlefield taught the world a timeless truth. Even giants can fall when faced with precision, courage, and the relentless force of movement. And so, the legend of the Hellcat lives on, not just in the wrecks of Lorraine, but in the enduring lesson that war is as much about mind and motion as it is about metal and might.